Awesome. Thank you, Kyle.
Logan, thanks for having me on the show and coming out. And we got our hidden room with just curtains, I guess.
No, it's a great room. They do well for sound dampening.
That's true. Yeah, you don't get the reflection or whatever, echo.
Yeah. No, it's once again, I really appreciate you coming on the show. I appreciate you responding to my cold email. So thank you.
I like to respond to cold emails if they're well written. Like it's always good. Good stuff comes through. We've had deals come through that way. A bunch of good things in my life have come from cold emails. So I'm a fan.
Nice. And, cool. Well, yeah, I think in this space, one of the biggest kind of hardships, I think, is kind of thinking long-term, and thinking from first principles. And you and Tushar and Multicoin, I think, have done a phenomenal job about thinking from first principles. Could you touch upon just how that process is, or how you kind of arrive at the first principle of thinking?
Sure. Thank you. A little flattered, but appreciate it. So I think it's mostly about calling bullshit, and it's actually like a very not fun process. Like the way human brain works is like you have heuristics and assumptions because like you can't think through every little detail of everything all of the time. Otherwise your brain would explode. And so kind of I think first principles thinking is like, hey, an idea enters your mind, like you say it, and like if other people around you don't try and pick it apart and call bullshit on whatever the assumptions are, then like that's kind of how I'd say you drift away from first principles thinking. And so it's a very methodical process, and it's a very not fun process in the sense of just like, it's literally like someone says something and there's maybe something interesting there, but then you have to say, no, this assumption's wrong, and really keep unpacking until you get all the way down to it. And you say, okay, well, there's these 6 related concepts, and like we thought all 6 of them were valid. It turns out only 3 of them are valid. Okay, like do we still want to invest? Like, maybe those 3 that don't matter, right? Like whatever. And just kind of being very systematic in like breaking that down. And it's like fairly confrontational and adversarial. It's not rude, but it's definitely like, if you're an outside person and you watch our investment committee meetings, you'd be like, dude, these people are not friendly. And it's, just getting used to that culture and that kind of style of feedback and reasoning.
So it's just continuing to unpack things to again and again.
Yeah. I mean, just keep peeling it back. You have to constantly question what the other people say and try and dig down to the deeper truth.
Is there like a methodology that you learned, like how to do that? Like for me at Tesla, like it was drilled onto us, like you have to do this to move forward. But I'm curious, like how you learned or how you taught yourself. Like, is it just something you practice?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, just kind of it's fairly intuitive for Tushar and I and how we operate. I think the part that required a little bit of, I guess you could call it training or practice, was just like the culture and IC, and like how to do it best mechanically. You have 8, 9 people, whatever, chatting about stuff. What we've actually done is moved towards away from talking, and actually more the IC happens in writing in the Google Doc itself. And so we are leaving comments, in line, and then people are responding. And so now you can have 6 or 7 conversations going concurrently. Someone puts something down, someone goes and grabs a link or, whatever, right? And it's fun because then like 6 months later, a year later, you like end up pulling up a memo for whatever reason, and you like look at the comments, and like it's pretty funny to see how you thought about it and how things get pushed back.
I also admire the writing. I think when you talk about things, there's a lot of nuance that can be left out, especially in technical discussions, that just is completely removed, or someone could say something and a lot of the surrounding context can just be left out and kind of be glossed over. But I appreciate that writing forces you to articulate your gaps in thinking.
Yeah, it's just much easier to call bullshit on someone's thinking and writing. In person, it's like, are you going to stop them mid-sentence? Like, this is a little more difficult. And then, like even just certain formatting things, right? So like we, require investment thesis summaries, like have to be 3 sentences or less, like it has to be super, super light. Whenever you're going to talk about bullet lists of things, like you have to do separate hard lines with numbers, and then you can refer back to. Then it makes referring back to things much easier in the document and such. I mean, our memos are fairly structured too. Like they all have the same subsection headers, and people just fill in those. And so it's just kind of like creating the context and the structure so that you can most productively disagree. Right.
And this is maybe another question. Like, how do you disagree in a way that is elegant, or how do you set up the fun to disagree? Because I think learning how to disagree is also one of the most important aspects of investing, because not everybody is going to agree on a variety of things. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't, but like eloquently disagreeing, respecting other people's opinions while like listening to them. Like, how do you set up that process?
Yeah, I mean, it's just, like everyone understands. I think it's a little bit of a culture shock for new employees on the investment team, that like, I'll just say like, literally I will comment frequently in people's documents and just say, this is wrong. And like, we don't even discuss it. I just leave it. That's fine. And like, I'm sure that new people are like, wow, that was like not a good meeting or whatever. But like, I've already forgotten about it 9 seconds later and like moved on. So it's not personal, and like you just have to accept like it's okay like to be wrong. We're in the business of like hopefully being right, but a lot of times we're wrong. And so not taking it personally and just understanding that it's about the process and making sure that the culture of the team and the expectations are set, that everyone just knows that. And kind of leadership from the top. I mean, Tushar and I both practice this, and everyone kind of understands that I think everyone understands once they've been doing it for a while why we all think it's kind of the optimal way to do it and make decisions.
No, it makes sense. I hope to do something similar. So I think it works well, ultimately. One thing that I thought was super interesting in one of the podcasts that I heard you speak to was blockchains kind of like at a high level. People have been describing them as operating systems or like Google Cloud. But you kind of mentioned them like blockchains at a more fundamental level, like just compete for developers. Could you kind of like go more into that topic and like how you would describe blockchains holistically, like maybe in your words?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, like, what does blockchain do? It's like getting a bunch of nodes to agree on something. Yeah. In this case, the something is, you can simplify it as the Merkle root, or you can say it's the state tree, basically. And like, what are you tracking in the state tree? Basically just who has how many coins is really all that's there. And so, that's what a blockchain does. It's like a stunningly simple concept. And obviously blockchains make it easy to create new coins, make it very easy to transfer coins, swap coins, do stuff with them. But at the end of the day, it's just keeping track of who has how many coins. That's really it. The other interesting thing is like parts of the state have relevancy to each other. So they're like the basic thing of like, well, the price of ETH USD is like X, or right, and so there's some mathematical relationship between ETH and USD. But the more these systems become more interesting as there's more parts of the state that are mathematically tied to each other. And so the next kind of obvious example is derivatives. And obviously there's funding rates and whatever else that kind of make all these systems work. But there you have a very clear coupling between different parts of the system. I should say different pieces of state, because there's now mathematical relationships between these things. And in NFT land, we haven't really seen much yet that has mathematical relationships, other than just like, here's 10,000 apes of the same collection, but that's like not very interesting, obviously. My hope is that people will build, games, experiences, whatever, that like have NFTs have more value, where parts of the state have more value and meaning relative to other parts of the state. So you get these three things, something new happens. Hey, if you take the Beeple 5,000 days photo, break it up into 5,000 pieces, like those obviously should, like, if you could collect 9 of them in a square or something happen, I don't know, right? Like you need to come up with some social experiments around these things. And that really hasn't happened yet in a super serious way. I'd say that's been a little slower than I would have expected. But even then, like you form a DAO, and then the DAO like buys assets. Like all those parts of the state are related to each other. There's always some tie in ownership. So blockchains are really about like representing those relationships.
Do you think that like that shared state as a whole is like, I mean, I don't know. I know you've talked about also like rollups and sharding and kind of like the trade-offs between those, and with the state on different, different, not blockchains or rollups or different shards. Do you think like that shared state is the most important aspect of the blockchains?
Yeah, I mean that's really what they are, is keeping track of who has how many coins. That really is it. Yeah.
That makes sense. Awesome. No, I think it's just very interesting. Like if you try to continue to break down the parts and what ultimately is the useful stuff that blockchains can do and how they can provide value to us. So I appreciate your wording. Another interview that I saw you, I believe with Raj, like early in the day, and also in one of your blog posts that you wrote, you were very intrigued by, I mean, Solana had, I think, 8 or 9 like main key innovations that Anatoly wrote about. But the 3 that you highlighted were sea-level, proof of history, and turbine. And correct me if I'm wrong. But could you explain or kind of go a little bit more into depth of each of those and why you found within Solana those each to be novel?
Sure. So proof of history is kind of the foundation of Solana. So if you look at how do you do high performance distributed systems in a trusted environment, so like Google, for example, or Amazon or Facebook or whatever, and how do these guys deal with conflicting transactions and ordering them all over the world? The answer is they have a clock and everything is timestamped. And that's like obviously a very simple solution. It makes perfect sense. The problem in a decentralized system with permissionless consensus is, who's providing the clock? And like there's no one. The proof of history is kind of the closest thing to a trust minimized clock. It's pretty kind of important base thing in Solana. And so the way it works is, one thing I actually realized was you want to be able to prove the passage of time. And you can do that by just taking a single SHA-256 hash and just recursively running it. And what's great about this is that you can verify it much quicker than you can run it originally. Because let's say you run the hash a million times, you run the loop a million times. You can verify, if you have 1,000 cores, you can take 1/1000th of it. And because you already know the intermediate steps, you can then check all 1,000 of those in parallel. And so although you have to do it sequentially the first time. So it's a pretty clever way to then have a way to just with math prove the passage of time, which is pretty cool. And then once you have that, then basically every time you run through the hash, you've now incremented time forward, so to speak, right? And so now you can timestamp all the transactions. And so once you do that, it's a pretty powerful idea. It's like the clock, so to speak, for the system. So that's kind of base innovation number 1. And we wrote an essay on this on our blog a few years ago. I think it's called The Separation of Time and State, if you want to go a little further on that. The next one is sea-level. Sea-level is just the runtime. Again, like kind of the base problem with scaling these blockchain things is you're kind of sort of trying to get 7 billion people to use the same computer, which is like obviously not really possible. And like, given that you like really want to be optimizing performance and you want to make sure that every registry of memory is being used optimally and every CPU cycle is being used optimally and such. And so I would actually argue that like blockchain systems are a lot like, just performance is key and you need to maximize every ounce of performance because of that reality. it was very clear to us when talking with Anatoly early on. Like, I'm not like an operating systems guy, a virtual machine guy. I don't appreciate all that stuff. But like his entire career was like doing that. So he knows how to get rid of all the overhead in a system and like get something down to the metal and run as low as possible, so you maximize performance. Over the years, a general thing that's happened in software over 30 or 40 years is just like as the computers got faster, you got tool sets that became more and more abstracted, which made it easier to build functional applications. But all of those tools and frameworks and operating systems and services and stuff were consuming parts of some of the system resources. And so kind of a fundamental trade-off is like, flexibility and ease of use versus performance, which has been fine for general software development. But like when you go back to, hey, how do we get 7 billion people to use the same computer? That's no longer a valid way to think about the problem. And so that always struck us as very important. And it's been written in Rust, and like Rust is like it's been the number one language on Stack Overflow for like 6 years in a row or something. So it feels like Rust is really kind of hitting its prime. It's just generally loved. And then the third is Turbine, which is block propagation. And so like you got this globally distributed set of nodes. How do you get the data between all of them, basically? The general answer for most blockchain things appears to be a gossip protocol. A gossip protocol is approximately what you think it is. It's literally you hear something and then you just spit it back out to other people and like they do the same thing. And if you do that, then data gets propagated through a network. It's obviously very resilient. Like if one node turns off randomly or whatever, like or internet pipes break, the system will keep working. So it's nice for that function, but it's obviously very inefficient. So Turbine is kind of intended to be the most optimal way to distribute data through a network. It's very inspired by the BitTorrent protocol. And so the basic idea is, hey, take whatever piece of data you want to send, break it up into pieces, and then send parts of it to these other two nodes, and then send a different set to these different set of nodes and a different set of nodes, and then those guys rebroadcast to everyone else. And so you can do this and you get kind of logarithmic benefits by doing this. And you maximize total data that can flow through the network in this way. So it's kind of a clever system. You need to add some erasure coding and some other things in there to add some fault tolerance, which I'll not cover right now. But it's like just a very clever design to maximize the data distribution.
Yeah, no, I've read those papers, the Medium papers, multiple times, and every time I read them, I feel like I learned something new, and just how clever they actually are. They're very impressive. And one big misnomer that I feel like most people get confused on with C level is that the single-threaded compute is kind of hit its asymptote, but not multi-core performance. And the multi-core performance is still very much increasing. And I think people get that confused with Moore's law.
This is. I should have touched on that with sea level. I forgot, but I mean, if you I've been following computer hardware stuff since I was 7 or whatever, and I remember every year, the Intel whatever Pentium 3 or whatever it was, it was 400 megahertz and it was 800 megahertz and it was 1.6 and there was the Pentium 4 and the gigahertz race. And I remember we thought in 2001 that we're gonna have 50 gigahertz computers, in 2010. And that obviously ended up not being the case. And kind of since call it end of the 2000s or so, CPU performance in just clock terms has not gone up at all, and actually maybe it's even gone down. And so all of the gains have come from improving the architectures and then custom chips and parallelism. And so if you look at among those, parallelism is where the bulk of the gains have come from. And you can see this too, Apple every year when they launch the iPhone, they always show these same two slides, and they show iPhone year-over-year CPU performance and iPhone year-over-year GPU performance. And if you zoom out to the 10-year chart and look at those two, the GPU one is way, 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 way steeper than the CPU one. And so, this has been true for a while. And it just seems obvious to me that okay, well, we need to optimize the software system given the realities of hardware.
Yeah, no, I think it totally makes sense. It's a brilliant design. One other thing, so that I'm like super interested by, you've said Solana has like a clear path to 1 million TPS, which I think is I'm confident it will get there. But on a larger term, you think there'll be millions of TPS or hundreds of millions of TPS that are required to like actually have like the world's population use blockchains. How do you kind of envision like Solana going from 1 million or from like now to 1 million, and then like how do you foresee like blockchains, whether Solana or like holistically going from like 1 million to the hundreds that we will need?
Yeah. So from here to get to call it 1 million, handful of things. I mean, the general performance optimizations they can continue to do. They'll probably get another 2x, maybe 3x out of that. Over several years, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit of stuff they haven't done, especially around storage and how they access memory and stuff. So that they're just kind of handling those things will help. And then the big one though is just like the hardware is getting faster and the networks are getting faster. So just like let that happen. Actually, QUIC, which is launching, I think in the next week or two, fingers crossed, like will help a lot of reduce overhead on network operations. So there's all of these things they can do all throughout the stack. But then just like let the networks get faster, let the hardware get faster. And you'll get another, between network performance and CPU performance in both increasing, like you'll be there within a few years, you'll get another 10x out of that. So that gets you into the million range from where we are today. And so the question is, how do you get another 100x on top of that? And that is not terribly clear. Just given like laws of just how fast you move electrons. ZK rollups may be part of the answer. You may just have multiple chains and have bridges where there's wormhole or layer 0 or something else that bridge between them. Not super clear to me how that nets out. Or you may just have it where the systems are coming along at call it 1 million, and just people do batching off chain and whatever other kind of mechanics they can get to. I think it's okay that you're near 1 million of demand and the 1 million of supply is available. It's just you don't want fees to become prohibitively expensive. And so it'll be interesting to see. In an Ethereum, you have a single gas auction per block. But in Solana, you have a gas auction per part of state per block. Or per slot, I guess, in Solana's terms. So, you're running now theoretically tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of auctions per second concurrently. It'll be interesting to see how that fee market develops over time. It's not, it doesn't necessarily, the prices don't necessarily have to go up a lot in that environment. So we'll kind of see.
Yeah, that makes sense. Touching on like ZK rollups on like a super high level, I kind of think about them as just in like the dumbest terms, like data compression, back down to the L1, if they're using it as a rollup. I'm curious like how you would kind of describe like, I know we don't really need to touch on optimistic rollups unless you want to, but I think ZKs are the path forward. With like ZK rollups, like how do you kind of like envision those like progressing over like the next couple of years or so and their role in L1s more holistically?
Making any projections on ZK rollups is very difficult because there can be some breakthrough tomorrow that or not, who knows? And even once there's a breakthrough, it's unclear how long it'll take to get into production. So for example, like there was a series of breakthroughs, I believe it was the fall of 2019. There was like a new ZK breakthrough every 3 weeks for like 3 months. And it was like some guy had come up with something, everyone else read it, and then the other researchers were like tweaked it and like came up with some new math or whatever. And there's been, I think, relatively few major breakthroughs since then. So, and I think most of that stuff, it took another 1.5 years to get into production. So it's pretty hard to make predictions here. My general sense is that they will not be competitive with just normal code, so non-ZK code, within a few years. I think that's quite unlikely. Because I think just the complexity of the systems and the proofs and everything is just so high. There is a theoretical world in 5 or 10 years in which like ZK code is the same developer experience and same usability and general understanding as non-ZK code. I'm an optimist, so I think we'll get to somewhere where that's like almost true. But I think that's like fairly far away. So then like the other kind of related question is like, will these things get adoption? And the answer is yes to some degree, but it's fairly unclear. Again, how that's going to play out. I think there's too much focus on the ZK EVM stuff. I like Cairo more for that reason, Starknet's stuff. But also like, I don't think we fully appreciate the limits of those systems because they're not really in production. And so if you don't, it's hard to reason about what you can and can't do with them. Specifically, they'll get some adoption for sure. It's not obvious to me that like they will necessarily get a ton of adoption. That's going to primarily be a function of like, do developers build amazing things on top of them? And the answer is possible, but it looks like, again, the dev tooling sucks. Like it's all new. No one understands how to use it, whatever. So we'll kind of see.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. In a world that ZK rollups do work well, how do you kind of envision that with composability? Like just one giant like ZK that you can compose within?
Probably, yeah, something like that. I expect there will be multiple of these things simply for political reasons. Someone will say, I don't like this other guy, and like they have a lot of the tokens for whether it's either their L1 or their L2, and like therefore I'm just gonna fork this shit because it's open source and like do my own version of it. And so human greed kind of necessitates that you'll have multiple competing things. But yeah, I don't see any reason why a handful of ZK rollups can't be pretty helpful, and you can do certainly you can do atomic composability within them. Again, like theoretically, we'll see how well it works in practice. And the other thing to kind of watch here is like watching really Wormhole and Stargate, Wormhole and Layer Zero, as kind of message passing systems. You can theoretically build any part of logic on any network and relay messages between them. In practice, it's unclear what exactly the boundaries will be of like what's the best way to manage state and like relationships, because you have to assume somewhat faultiness as like the bridge operates and things go. And so, like maybe you can have assets collateral on one chain and maybe you can take out debt on another chain. That may work. But like if you want to do something that looks like Margin 5, for example, which is a full-blown prime brokerage, like maybe that doesn't work. In like this setting. So it's just unclear like the limits of that in practice. Again, the theory Layer Zero and Wormhole can do anything. In practice, I think we'll find practical limits of like what people are willing to build.
I totally agree. Yeah, no, I'm super interested to see how it all unfolds. I think overall the less parts we kind of, and the less complicated we make them all, I think the better. But we'll see how ultimately it ends up. Kind of jumping off on that note with like composability and like single shard. I'm super curious to learn more about Aptos. I know their consensus algorithm is hot stuff, and then they have a similar or slightly different programming language move. Could you go into a little bit of both of those and kind of like, I don't know, just why you like it?
Yeah, happy to. So let's touch on hot stuff. So in general, I think consensus algorithms are overrated in their importance in these systems. They're obviously necessary, and I do realize Bitcoin, like that was kind of the key thing that made it possible. But like The design space for these things is fairly well understood. More or less all of them, with the exception of Avalanche and Proof of Work, are PBFT, basically. That includes Solana, which they call it Tower, but it's basically PBFT, which has been around for 20 some odd years. This is well understood. So I don't find them to be that interesting, and I don't think they're the primary bottleneck in scaling these systems. But hot stuff is cool. It's well liked. It's well reviewed. That's fine. But the other one that's much more interesting to me is Move, because Move is exposed to the developers. Obviously, they have to build in it. Solana takes a fairly opinionated approach, which is, dude, it's just Rust and you just do whatever you want and like, good luck. Hopefully, don't write bad code. And like my kind of free speech idealist likes that approach. But there's a lot of people who, no one wants to be the guy who wrote the line of code that had the bug that blew up $500 million. And like, look, there are startup founders who are willing to do that stuff, which is one thing. But then like, if you work at big company X, you find that to be somewhat scary. You think about your job and your kids and whatever. So I buy the argument that there's a class of developers that wants a more a safer, basically, sandbox to play in, not quite as sharp on the edges. And look, I'm no programming languages expert, but like from what we can gather, it's like Move is very well designed to make it much harder to hurt yourself, and preserves more or less all of the performance that you get in something like Rust. So I kind of like that model, and I think that will have a pretty strong appeal to some developers.
Nice. And does Aptos also able to figure out the clock problem?
No, so they're not using anything like proof of history, and hot stuff is just PBFT.
Okay. Interesting. Very cool. No, I'm trying to learn more about it. I'm excited for their testnet and then upcoming, I think, public beta or launch later this year.
It should be in a month or 2 or 3. Yeah, fairly soon.
I'm super excited about it. Interested to see how it blossoms. Awesome. I'm also like, so in your conference, your Multicoin summit, one thing that you were particularly kind of highlighted was social and creators. And I know you've even touched upon like social tokens. I'm curious just how you think about social, like creator monetization, and still kind of holistically how you're thinking about social tokens, because I find those very interesting, and I'm curious to see your opinions on them.
My intuition is that human greed dictates they must exist, I think, because having, right, like people count fan followers on Instagram and Twitter and whatever as a proxy for status and wealth. Crypto seems to be just or social tokens are just like the very direct financialization of that kind of core behavioral need. So I think you can map like all 7 deadly sins to like map to social tokens like somehow. That usually feels like a pretty good thing to invest in. So I love the theory of them. Well, correction. The theory that they should work to me seems right for kind of those reasons. None of them have worked so far in practice at all. Like they've just been complete and total flopped. So we haven't found the right behavioral mechanisms to unlock here. And like some norms need to be established, which will take some time, because obviously it's very prone for manipulation and a lot of bad behavior is obvious around them. And so people need to develop both, the people who issue them and asset issuers need to develop the norms of what to say and don't say and how to manage that. And then obviously buyers need to understand how to think about them too. So and those things take time to develop, and that's an iterative process and cycle. In the same way that people's behaviors have changed. People used to post on Twitter like, I ate a donut, and like that was dumb. Now people don't post that anymore, right? So that needs to happen. There's some interesting things, and there's kind of two theories of how that does happen. One is like some startups work with new musicians or artists or whatever, and they like cleverly incorporate that into their brand and whatever they do, and like it eventually takes off and they become famous and talk about it and stuff. That seems like a fairly reasonable probability that will happen. The other way it happens is someone like Elon Musk just like starts fucking tweeting, please go buy Elon coin or whatever. Which also may happen, right? Like that doesn't seem very improbable.
I mean, now that he bought Twitter, I think he has a little bit more leeway.
Yeah, and he doesn't care what the SEC has to say. And so, like, and if he does that, like that could immediately spark like a social movement, right? And then every celebrity is going to be like, oh, what do I do? And like, so I think, both can happen. I'm fairly optimistic one of those two routes will happen.
That makes sense. I've heard I personally am a fan also of the social tokens. I'm curious you kind of remove the legality standpoint, but how they work out. I've heard kind of the counter argument for those like being embodied with NFTs, but I would still like just strictly the coin to happen as well.
Yeah, I mean it's just simpler. It concentrates liquidity. It's a shelling point, right? With the problem with NFTs is like, which NFT do I buy? And it's just like, okay, this guy released 500 NFTs for whatever, and then 6 months later releases more, and it's like now you have so many choices to make. With Elon coin, it's just like, okay, like go hit the buy button. that's it.
When are we all aping Elon coin?
Exactly. I mean, yeah, right. So it's a shelling point. Obviously, people talk about market cap in a different way. I think talking about market cap will be one of the core behaviors that happens around this. I have a higher market cap than you do. Right? People count Twitter followers, Instagram followers, and TikTok followers. And so I think this will just be another one of the public social measures of status.
Yeah, we like to play those games. So, no, totally makes sense. Yeah. And we kind of touched upon, I think, NFTs at the beginning. One of the big things that I was surprised by during DeFi summer, when all the composability was going on in 2020, I was like, this is happening. Like, we're finally going back. Like, normies are going to adopt it. But they really didn't. Or at least not in the way that I thought, where I was trying to get friends to use Uniswap or do something on Comp. But it wasn't until really personally Solana, where the gas fees were cheap and my normie friends could actually buy NFTs that weren't prohibitively expensive, where they actually got into blockchain much more than DeFi. So I thought that was very interesting. I'm curious, like how you kind of think NFTs have played a role in like culture, or just how they've carried the space.
Yes, a few comments. One, I think my kind of most generalized mental model for NFTs is they represent the financialization of culture, of cultural capital. And that's one mental model of them. Second kind of comment is just like people like gambling. A lot. And so that's fun. And like NFTs are a cool new form of gambling. Like, I don't know, why is this ape worth more than this ape? I don't know. It's not a question I'm qualified to answer, but I guess a lot of people think that's fun. So there's that. And then, these NFT communities seem to be a shelling point for just people to bullshit about something on the internet. You go to the Discourse for any of these things and Reddits, and there's just all kinds of weird stuff, right? And like it's kind of entertainment. It's kind of a shelling point. We all have something in common, and there's something to that. Like there's clearly something there. If you meet a guy at a bar and they happen to be from the same town you were from and like the same sports team, it's just like, okay, you have immediate kind of shared bonding or connection. So kind of same thing here. What I really want to see is I want to see like some NFTs get used for more things that tie to the real world more. So like, for example, seeing museums issue NFTs or something would be cool. Seeing artists use NFTs, musicians in particular, would be very cool. Creating some sort of large social game experiment thing around NFTs would be cool. You know, like, hey, get these pictures together and like something happens. I think this design space to combine money and social coordination in a permissionless way is like very, very cool. I think NFTs will really, a lot of that will happen via NFTs.
Yeah. It makes sense. I've been shocked by it all, and it's cool to watch it unfold, whether it's gambling or friends that you make online in different communities. So it's definitely interesting to watch it unfold. One of the things that I also found super interesting was your Twitter game, and I'm still like very confused by Twitter holistically, but I think you do a good job of finding the answers that you're looking for. Could you kind of touch upon, I think you've described it as Cunningham's Law, but kind of touch upon like how you use Twitter and just kind of how you think about it?
Yeah, so how I've used Twitter has evolved over time. I think it was more important to be more divisive when we were smaller.
Would you still recommend that?
For new people, yes, absolutely. It is a very effective strategy. It works for the same reason that like all press is good press works. Yes, but it's kind of changed over time. Today, I think I look at Twitter primarily as a place to kind of share threads and like longer form thinking on some set of ideas, but it's not long form enough to make it to a blog post. So I really enjoyed for that. I don't do it very much anymore, but I enjoy it. But actually, my favorite thing is actually just responding to people. People post all kinds of stuff, and a pretty huge percentage, I'd say 80% plus of my tweets are responding to people who either ask a question or are posting something interesting. I really enjoy that. That's less effective for garnering new followers, but I really enjoy it. And now it's just it's just like a fun hangout place. But the intellectual stimulation from Twitter is like off the charts.
Yeah. There's, both good and bad.
Yes.
It's interesting. The reply guys, I think it's interesting as the space continues to grow larger, the different dichotomies of people that have thought about the space a lot and continue to grow, and they're more nuanced opinions versus people that just bought their first NFT and learning about NFTs and how to move their money from in exchange to a wallet. But nonetheless, it's interesting. Touching upon that, when you kind of view, say, Dune Analytics on like the most popular dApps, I think OpenSea is maybe 1 or 2 million, only a couple million people that have ever interacted with OpenSea, and then Uniswap, I think, is the most popular on ETH with like 3 or 4 million people or contracts or addresses that have ever interacted with a contract. How do you think we go from low millions to hundreds of millions and billions? Is it just continuing to scale the layer 1 blockchains and layer 2s?
You need developers to build stuff that people want to use. I think the way we get from low single-digit millions to hundreds of millions is probably via big companies leveraging these things. Facebook has said they're going to launch Instagram NFTs fairly soon.
Have they said which platform?
They have not announced which platform or platforms. I think it's much more likely to be the latter than the former. So, once that happens, a lot more people are going to get access to NFTs. PayPal has been flirting with crypto for a while. Twitter has been flirting with crypto for a while, right? Square, he renamed the company. So all these things are happening. And I think those guys will roll out crypto in a meaningful way in their mainstream applications in the not too distant future. And so I think that's going to be a big, we still haven't had that moment happen yet. But I think it'll happen in the fairly near future.
Do you think those new users will have to understand private key management, or do you think those big companies will abstract that away?
It'll be abstracted.
Do you think they'll still be able to interact with like other dApps if they want to, or is it just going to kind of be like a sandbox?
I think most of these environments will be fairly sandboxed. I think they're going to try and keep the experience constrained.
Cool. I think like one other thing I've also appreciated about Multicoin is just like how you approach investing from like the market, team, and product standpoint. And I believe it's market first. Can you touch upon that? Because I think that's different than other firms and how they approach it.
Yeah, so there's actually this old Mark Andreessen essay. It's like 15 years old or something. And it says like, what should VCs focus on? Market, product, or team? And he answers conclusively, the answer is market. And he primarily is, which I agree with, although for a little bit different reasons than what he suggests. Actually, with more pointed views. The smart people in a bad market, like, sorry, the market sucks. Like, okay, you're not nothing's gonna happen. So we spend all our time there. Product, I generally don't care about. I think is by far the least important, because product is, you can assess it at a moment in time. You can kind of assess how much have they built, how fast. But I don't find it to be a super useful framework for making investments. When we think about market, what we really focus on is market structure, understanding, okay, look, people are trying to solve this problem somehow today. There's probably some incumbents somewhere. So what are those incumbents missing? And why are they structurally or unable or unwilling to compete with this new thing? Because every guy's going to launch a new thing. Incumbents are going to hear about it, so why don't they squash him? And what we've discovered is with some investments, we can develop a pretty high degree of conviction that incumbents won't respond, and that the new thing can be very asymmetric to the old things, and develop conviction around that happening. So we spent almost all of our time debating the realities of the market structure.
And that goes back to like thesis and being more written within the firm.
Absolutely.
Gotcha. No, I think it's super interesting. Yeah, maybe on like kind of tying it back to Solana. When I was there, I recently went to Spain to the Avalanche event, and I think I was the biggest Solana bull there. A lot of people.
Were you wearing green or purple, or were you wearing red?
I was neutral. All
right, we're in black.
I tried to, I don't know, I expressed my opinions on the different nuances, but yeah, I think I was the biggest Solana bull there. But the main callouts that people, when I spoke to, one were like the size of the nodes, two was like the number of nodes, and then three was downtime. I think you can kind of negate the last one on the downtime, like bugs happen, you fix them and move on. But one like interesting conversation that I saw you have was with Kane, and kind of like debating or talking about the differences between like an ETH node and Solana node. Could you like retouch upon that topic? Because I don't think very many people like understand like those subtle differences of like what it actually takes to run an Ethereum node versus like a Solana node, and how minute some of those differences can be.
Sure. So the question is like, what are you designing a system for? As you add more nodes to a system, then you increase the probability that if we have World War III, that at least one copy survives. You make it harder for there to be collusion for disordering transactions or whatever. That's really about it. And actually, the second thing I described is really a function of the stake distribution, not the node count. And so our view has been that you should not optimize for making that number of nodes go as high as possible. I think the value to society across kind of all of these related dimensions is logarithmic, with number of nodes as the x-axis. That's fairly high conviction view in my view. Assuming that's the case, then it's okay that you can't run a node on your laptop. There are 7 billion people in the world, 8 billion people in the world. Like you can just assume some of them are running it. That's a valid assumption. And so I like optimizing kind of along that basic reality. The ETH people prioritize, and Bitcoin people prioritize running a node on a Raspberry Pi or on a laptop or something, which I think is nice for ideological reasons if you want to say it, but I don't understand what you're gaining from it.
Makes sense. Cool. No, I think we kind of touched upon a lot of the things that I was personally interested in. One of the things that I think is still kind of developing as large is bridges, and I think you touched upon that with layer 0. How do you see bridges kind of coming to be within like these different blockchain ecosystems, and the role that bridges can kind of play to increase scalability as a whole?
Yeah, so there's definitely a pretty meaningful probability that you have a handful of networks that have the majority of activity happening on them. If that's true, then you will want those people to talk to each other, and so you're going to need bridges. There's kind of two probably major functions to think about here. One is arbitrary message, relaying the state of the one chain to the validators in another chain so they can verify it. There's IBC, there's layer 0, there's wormhole, there's people trying to do the zero knowledge versions of all of these things, although none of those exist yet. And then the other approach is to, the next thing is a superset of message relaying, which is asset pegging. That today is primarily run by, I think, Wormhole, and I think there's one other, Synapse, or maybe, I forget the other one. These bridges all have a lot of money in them. I think none of them are going to go away. I think we'll have 2 or 3 bridges that will probably control most of the value. The thing you don't want is, as a user, you don't want to have Wormhole ETH and Solid ETH and something else ETH, layer 0 ETH. Those all on Solana network. And then because those are not fungible with each other, which means you have to have slippage. People have been trained that when I send you $10 on Venmo, you receive $10, not $9.98. And so I think it's pretty important to maintain that UX kind of thing. It's very hard to see a world in which that happens with multiple bridges. I'm pretty optimistic you'll have kind of something very close to one bridge to rule them all.
Interesting. Nice. Yeah, I think that makes sense. Well, cool. Maybe we can just wrap it up there, unless there's anything in particular you'd like to touch upon or anything that you're excited for in the next say 2 or 3 years. I won't do short-term time frame. Someone asked me what was going to happen in the market in like 3 to 6 months. I was like, honestly, I have no idea. It could go up 50% or 100%. It could go down 50%. I try to think long-term because otherwise it's just kind of a coin flip in my opinion. But yeah, anything that you're excited or particularly interested in the next couple of years or longer time horizon?
I think the thing that we spend the most time on as a firm is, I think this new form of capital formation that kind of Helium first really represented. You got 700,000 people. I think they just crossed 750 to buy a hotspot, do this thing so that they could print tokens. And that experiment worked. And it's proven that you can do this for other things. I'm very interested in all of the things that look like Helium in that sense. Hive Mapper's the next one, which we also just recently invested in and announced. We've done one more that we've not yet announced. And I want to do like 20 more of those. Yeah. I think this is so disruptive to like a lot of businesses and just like it's good for the world. So I'm very excited for that.
Nice. That makes total sense. Awesome. Well, I appreciate your time, Kyle. Thank you once again. It was a pleasure. Appreciate you having me in Austin. Yeah, thank you.
Hey, Logan, thank you for flying down here. And this was awesome. Glad to be an early guest on the show before it makes it big.
I appreciate it. Thank you.